Hello and welcome to this Wednesday edition of FreightWaves Now. I'm your host Anthony Smith, and coming up, Mike Baudendistel is going to give us a rail intermodal update. But first, we're going to go to Zach Strickland with the carrier update brought to you by PowerFleet. Stay tuned.
Hey everyone, and welcome to your Wednesday carrier update presented by PowerFleet. I'm Zach Strickland, and we are continuing to watch Laura progress towards the Gulf Coast, hitting right there between Galveston and Lake Charles area in Louisiana, part of Texas. It has strengthened all the way up to a Category 4, potentially Category 4 hurricane, which is a maximum sustained winds of about 140 miles an hour, which is way stronger than it was forecast to be this time yesterday. Again, check out Nick Austin's weather forecast to get into the details and minutia of that. But the concern for the freight market, of course, continues to be, what does it do to the infrastructure? What does it do to the the freight market in terms of what are we seeing carriers do in front of this storm to prepare for it? What are shippers doing, more importantly, as we get through that? So it's forecast to come all the way up into Arkansas and sustain a high level of winds in Arkansas. A lot of rain getting dumped all the way up into the Memphis market area and then turning sharply as it drives off to the east really rapidly, dumping rain and also heavy winds coming across the Tennessee Valley there. But again, this little corridor right here, from Louisiana, Arkansas, part of Missouri, and western Tennessee, those are going to be the focal points for the freight market, as a lot of people you're going to see a lot of trees down, a lot of power outages. You're going to see a lot of infrastructure damage, more than likely, with a storm like this, because it is so strong and it's going to move rapidly, which is going to mean that a lot of these areas that aren't used to seeing this type of environment, these winds, they're going to be exposed to that. A lot of forested area right through there. So again, infrastructure damage potential is pretty high, not necessarily to the population in general, but this could mean some significant infrastructure damage, and therefore recovery effort is going to be needed. Looking at our weighted rejection index for the United States right now, I'm doing this the opposite way. I'm looking at falling weighted rejection index values rapidly, because I noticed that we have a couple of red spots on the map right around the storm impact area, which again, we're talking about Memphis right there in Tennessee and part of Arkansas, and then over there around Houston, Fort Worth, and of course San Antonio, and a little bit further west than the actual impact area over there around Laredo. We're seeing a lot of falling tender rejection rates at this point. So these markets, again, carriers are trying to get out of the way of this storm. Looking at the tender rejection rate for the Houston market and also the Memphis market, you can see tender rejection rates here in Memphis in purple. They're falling. They're falling rapidly in front of the storm. Again, carriers are probably just trying to get out of the way of this storm, make sure that they do not have exposure to it. Tender rejection rate for the United States continues to climb. So again, these two markets falling in contradiction to the what we're seeing on the national level. Again, indicative of carriers trying to take whatever they can just to get out of the way of this system. Looking at the Little Rock market on a little bit more detailed level, I can see again another market with falling tender rejection rates as tender rejections fall back down to around 45% after having another increasing level. Volumes there in the yellow line, they're also falling. So volumes coming down, shippers probably starting to shut down here a little bit in preparation for this system coming through. So carriers, again, do not expect as much activity on the spot market. You should not see as much upward pressure on your rates coming out of this market as well. Tweener and long haul freight dominates this market in terms of overall volumes coming out of it. So anything over 450 miles is going to be where you're going to find the most opportunity for freight, which is good news if you're trying to get out of the way of the system. Looking at one last chart on San Antonio. San Antonio, not necessarily a direct hit for the freight market, or for the storm, I should say, but it is showing a significant change in direction. So I think it is important to look at San Antonio real quick, as we have volumes falling volumes increasing dramatically there in the orange line, and tender rejection rates falling dramatically in that line. San Antonio, traditionally a very backhaul market. You don't necessarily want to go in there because there's just not enough freight coming out. Tender rejection rates, though, were elevated over the last couple of weeks, up around 28%, and now we've fallen all the way back down to 17.5% on the tender rejection rate. So do not expect to go into San Antonio and get any significant help. And again, spot market rates should be coming down out of this market as well. And that'll do it for today's Carrier Update.
The comprehensive logistics offerings from PowerFleet cover in-cab ELD, fleet management, trailer tracking, cargo monitoring, and tracking other assets such as chassis and intermodal containers. Power up your operations with PowerFleet.
Hello and welcome to the Rail and Intermodal Update. I'm here with Mike Baudendistel. Mike, what's the latest?
So the latest is I want to dig into one lane in particular. So one of the strengths of Sonar is that we can really dig into the lane that really the user cares the most about. And the lane for today is Chicago to Dallas. And we have up on this chart the volume, the intermodal volume from LA, from Chicago to Dallas in blue, and then Dallas back to Chicago in yellow. And what you see here is for Chicago to Dallas, sort of southbound, this is the highest level it's been since the last peak season. So really since last call it December. Sometimes in intermodal it's October, but really it's the highest level of the year. And also going northbound, really more dramatically at the highest level of the year. So in either direction, about 2 trains a day, call it 300 containers on average. And you see closer to you, southbound about up 16% in the since about December, down 1%. Going from Chicago down to down to Dallas. So the Dallas market, outbound, going north is the one that's changed more. When we take a look at rates, this is even a more dramatic difference. I mean, the rates, the intermodal spot rates, we have a unique data series for that in Sonar, and between Chicago and Dallas in either direction, they're pretty close, 285 and 250 respectively. That's unusual. Usually Chicago to Dallas, we're up here in the 2.25 range, and Dallas to Chicago, we're down here at $1.25. So Dallas to Chicago has basically doubled in the last year, whereas Chicago to Dallas has risen more modestly. So my explanation for this is not so much those intermodal volumes that I just showed you, but really taking a look at the trucking side of the equation. So this is competitive with the highway. If you truck that distance, it's about 1,000 miles. So that's 2 days, on the road. If you do it intermodal, maybe that's an extra day, maybe it's 3 days. So you typically give up a little bit of that speed for maybe a little bit lower price in intermodal, which maybe that's less true now with those intermodal rates we just saw. But taking a look at intermodal rates and comparing that to the long haul outbound tender rejection index. So everyone at FreightWaves talks a lot about the outbound tender rejection index, OTRI. I like to put an L in front of it because that makes it the long haul, which makes it much more relevant for intermodal. And these two charts side by side, look very similar, but the magnitude is what I want to call your attention to. So long haul tender rejection rate out of Chicago is 12.1%. So that's well below the national average for long haul, which is about 26%. Overall, OTRI is about 24%. So Chicago is a relatively loose market, maybe not necessarily a loose market, but maybe one that's more imbalanced. Dallas, you look there, 25.6%, so that's roughly in line with the national average, which is a very tight market right at the moment. And when we look at the OTRI and low TRI on a map, what you see is a lot of tightness in sort of the south central part of the country, and not just places that are going to be impacted by the hurricane. I mean, even places like Fayetteville, Little Rock, a lot of those places that are relatively nearby. Dallas, sort of in that south central region, are the ones that are the tightest. And so really what these charts illustrate is that the tender rejections tend to lead the spot rates, and so you've seen the spot rates rise and sort of rise more dramatically in that Dallas to Chicago lane, sort of that northbound lane, because that market is tightened up more on the highway. So it's looking at intermodal as a little bit of a relief valve, although I think the capacity there is getting tight too, because the container availability is there's only so many containers that are available. I just listened to the IANA presentation yesterday, and they said that overall this year there's going to be about 1% more containers versus last year, which isn't a whole lot considering the rebound we've seen with domestic traffic.
And last question, what would constitute something to be long haul?
So we define it as 800 miles or greater. So that makes it relevant for intermodal. With intermodal, there's very little that moves less than 500 miles, and that's even sort of a tough equation. But generally, you're looking at something like 1,000 miles. If you look at the most dense intermodal lanes, those being LA to Chicago, LA to Dallas, I mean, those are 1,500, 2,000 plus miles. The East Coast ones, which would be something like a New York to Chicago, is about 900 miles. So I like to look at that long haul LOTRI, which is 800 miles or longer.
Excellent, Mike. Insightful as always. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for tuning in. That's going to do it for this Rail and Intermodal update, and that's also going to wrap up this episode of FreightWaves Now. As always, the content doesn't stop here. You can check out our streaming platform on all your favorite streaming platforms like Apple TV. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.